Satsuki Kakeru is a young teen with very vague origins. He was born with an odd right eye and has been forced to cover it out of embarrassment and fear of being called a freak by his peers. A few months after he was born, Kakeru lost both his parents in a fatal incident. Ever since then, he's been living with his elder sister for a few more years. However, life happened yet again and he also lost his elder sister after she killed herself to end her suffering. With no family left to protect young Kakeru, he was forced to seek refuge in the city's orphanage. Along the line, he met Yuka and became good friends with her. Having gone through the same ordeal as him, Kakeru found it easy to make friends with her. He spends a few years growing up together with her in the orphanage and then enrolls in the city high school when they are of age. In the opening scene, a lady with orange hair is seen meditating in front of a large fire. After a few seconds of meditating, the fire spread to a few parts of the room and tore some parts of her clothes. Suddenly, a girl's silhouette appears in the fire and disappears soon after. The following morning, Kakeru is seen staring at the windy sky as usual. Yuka joins him shortly and sits near him to stare at the faint moon in the morning sky. As she stares at the moon, Kakeru steals a glance at Yuka and recalls his sister's suicide and the unthinkable things he had to go through in the orphanage. He becomes thankful for having someone like Yuka on his side and wishes she could be there for him forever. Yuka catches him staring at her and smiles warmly. She then asks what Kakeru was thinking, but he just couldn't say anything. Yuka gets up and urges her friend to get up and walk home with her. Elsewhere, another lady with white hair approaches Kakeru's high school with her dog and an index book in her hand. Kakeru and Yuka get to the school's entrance where they meet their other friends, the pervert, Tadashi, and the uptight iron lady, Kaori. Tadashi teases Kakeru and Yuka and starts saying sultry things to them. However, Kaori was there to kick his ass for his perverse talks. As he watches the hubbub goes in front of him, Kakeru smiles as he also recognizes them as his friends. After joking around, the four of them walk towards the supermarket, Ayanasu, to get something as there is a sale going on. Kaori asks Yuka if she would love to go to the supermarket with them. However, since Kakeru wasn't going to go into a crowded space, Yuka wasn't going either. Kakeru escorts Yuka back to her adopted parents' home. However, he feels bad for not letting his dear friend enjoy her one-time offer to catch a sale. So, he eventually mans up and asks Yuka to follow him back to Ayanasu. Yuka happily follows him there. On their way there, they pass through a suspended bridge and hold hands. At one point, something out of the ordinary happens. Suddenly, Yuka and Kakeru feel numb and are transported to another world. This world is an alternate dimension with a red sky and a dark moon. Kakeru looks around and finds out everywhere's red and gory. Yuka gets very scared and she stays near Kakeru. Eventually, Yuka breaks down and starts crying. Kakeru, however, checks around to make sure everything's okay. He takes Yuka to her house in the alternate dimension and finds nothing there. Later on, they take to the streets to find someone they can talk to. Sadly, they were attacked by black demons in the middle of the street. With nobody there to support or help them, Kakeru and Yuka hold each other as they wait for death to come after them. Suddenly, they find themselves back in their real world with bystanders giving them puzzled looks. Kakeru gets to sleep like a baby that night. However, a nightmare wakes him up and he finds Yuka by his side. Turns out Yuka couldn't sleep the previous night either as she was still scared from the ordeal. She jokes around a little bit with Kakeru and escorts him to school eventually. As they approach the school, Yuka gets a tingling feeling and stops on the way. Kakeru brings her back to order and walks her back to class. Before entering, Kakeru promises to take care of Yuka should something happen. By this time, Tadashi and Kaori were already there with them. They scold Kakeru for making a girl cry and make sure he doesn't do such a thing again. Kakeru rushes to class with Yuka as the bell rings. In class, the new transfer student from Italy, who's been spying on Kakeru, Momono, is introduced to the entire class. After class that day, she ignores the plethora of boys and girls looking to find out more about her and walks over to Kakeru to say hi, almost as if she were there to spy on him. Yuka faints a little and cuts Momono's meeting with Kakeru short. Kakeru carries her to the clinic. On their way to the clinic, a bully bullies them but Kakeru ignores him and goes in to see the nurse. Thankfully, Yuka was just tired from not getting enough sleep. Once she's done resting, she should be fine. Kakeru is just about to take his leave when the nurse gets up and asks him about the eye patch on his right eye. Kakeru ignores her question and heads out. After he's gone, the nurse asks Yuka if she's already dating Kakeru. Yuka is embarrassed. Right on the rooftop of the school's building, the orange-haired girl stares into the sky, as if waiting for something to happen. After getting back to normal, Kakeru escorts Yuka back to the supermarket, completely in the blue of the person following them. Kakeru makes sure he has a good time with his dear friend as they get back to that same bridge that transported them to the other world. As they approach that spot, Yuka advises Kakeru to take another route. So, Kakeru takes her to the train station and takes the subway. Yuka gets to have a nice time with the love of her life as she gets amazing toys and things for herself and Kakeru. After not buying anything, she takes a break with Kakeru in the park. The duo have a moment and Yuka asks Kakeru to rest his head on her thighs. Kakeru refuses at first, but then Yuka begs him to do it. Kakeru does so and finds it incredibly soothing. While resting, Kakeru gets that feeling again and gets up to find his sister's ghost standing in front of them. In a split second, they're both back in the alternate world. The demons come back and Kakeru is trapped again with Yuka. This time, however, the boss of the demons and his assistant join in to see what's going to happen to Kakeru. As the demons get closer to Kakeru and Yuka, orange-haired girl shows up with her lightning sword to save Kakeru and Yuka from certain death. She uses the lightning effect on her sword to take down all the demons plaguing Kakeru and Yuka. After she's done, she walks over to meet Kakeru and Yuka, but then hears a weird sound. Orange-haired girl urges Yuka and Kakeru to follow her to safety. Kakeru and Yuka take a look at the weird pillars of light emanating from the middle of the alternate dimension, and then quickly rush to catch up to orange-haired girl. When they get to a safe spot, they thank the lady for helping them and ask for her real name. She introduces herself as Misuzu and tells them a little about the alternate dimension they're all in. She explains that the alternate dimension was created by an unknown person. They were chosen specifically because of one special power peculiar to them. Kakeru tells Misuzu that there's nothing special about them. However, before she could talk, they heard another sound in the distance. Misuzu traces the source of the sound to the center of the alternate dimension and decides to check it out. Kakeru and Yuka ask to check it out with her, but then Misuzu wasn't ready to let them go. Suddenly, more demons begin to attack them. Misuzu fends them off and joins the other two up front so they can get to the source of the sound. They get to the center of the sound, but before entering, Misuzu tries to get Kakeru and Yuka to hide. Thankfully, they're man enough to get inside with her, so they continue running. Kakeru's right eye reacts to something around that region and he stops for a little while to check it out. Soon after, he gets up to keep moving. However, it was already too late as the boss's assistant, Superbia, was already there. Superbia forbids them from getting past that point. However, when Misuzu challenges her, she takes her up on the fight and attacks her. Misuzu uses a magic spell on Superbia and teleports herself to the inner segment of the center of the alternate dimension. There, they find a beautiful maiden with white hair imprisoned in a crystal. The lady kept on begging them to release her. The lady, who's later identified as Lysette, tells them that she's being manipulated against her will. Misuzu urges Kakeru not to fall for her sweet voice as there is something in her subconscious causing her to wreak havoc on the entire place. Yuka asks Misuzu to release Lysette from her pain, but before they do anything, the real boss and his subordinates appear in the same room with them. Misuzu tries to use her magic, but it doesn't work in the room. The boss forbids them from existing and instructs Superbia to destroy Kakeru. Superbia leaps into action, but as she's about to catch up to Kakeru, the red night ends and Kakeru alongside the two girls is teleported back to the normal world. Moments after getting back to the real world, they get to a cafe to freshen up and discuss their recent ordeal. While they sip some coffee, Misuzu tells them about the other 3 students she's found in the Red Night with her. After confirming that they were also fighting demons like her, Kakeru and Yuka ask to see them. However, Misuzu promises to introduce them to each other once they return to school. Kakeru thanks her and asks her the million-dollar question. Does he have any special power within him? Seeing as the boss specifically wanted him gone, there must be something special about him. Misuzu asks him to take off his eye patch. Kakeru does so and reveals his other eye to Misuzu. The yellow right eye weirdly tingles Misuzu, and she quickly urges him to put his patch back on. Later that evening, Kakeru is seen walking the streets with Yuka, thinking about his hidden power. Yuka gets a little sheepish and holds his hands. She begs Kakeru not to ever leave her side. Kakeru promises to always be there for her no matter what. Just then, their other friends, Kaori and Tadashi, show up to say hi. After the usual hubbub, Kakeru walked over to see Momono, who was standing in the distance. At first, she resembles his dead sister, but then again, he looks again and realizes it's Momono. Kaori and Momono get into a fight and Kakeru leaves with Yuka. Later on, they walk into a store and find another classmate, Yukiko, working there as a receptionist. She introduces herself and also asks after their names. After introducing themselves, the trio have an awkward moment. Soon after, she serves them some nice coffee and heals the cut on her hand. Kakeru and his friend return home when it gets very dark. Yuka hugs Kakeru before getting into her house and hopes they can be together forever. But Kakeru was too worried about his power. He gets back home and has another nightmare about a wounded soldier again. He wakes up early that morning and gets back to school. In the library, Kakeru finds a weird book calling to him. Yuka joins him and distracts him a little, but he takes out the book and finds his sister's face staring at him. Kakeru quickly rushes to the back of the book rack to see his sister, but unfortunately, the ghost is already far gone. Instead, he found a note telling him that he summoned the demon. After reading the note, Kakeru's right eye starts aching. Shortly afterwards, Kakeru, Yuka, and Misuzu go outside their classroom to check out the black moon that just formed in the sky. Kakeru asks for an explanation, but then again, Misuzu still doesn't have an answer to his question. However, they quickly get back into an empty hallway to talk. Misuzu tells them to come meet her in the school if they happen to get in the alternate dimension again. Just then, the bell rings and Misuzu excuses herself to take a break. Before going, Kakeru asks to see her after class, to which she says yes. In class, Kakeru gets lost in his thoughts. The teacher asks him a question and finds out just how far gone he is. She calls him back to order and urges him to keep his thoughts in class. Tadashi jokes around and causes the others to laugh at him. Kaori disciplines him. Meanwhile, Yuka keeps her sights on Kakeru as she wonders what could happen in his head. After class, Kakeru heads over to the staircase to meet with Misuzu. There, he asks her to train him on handling a sword. Misuzu, however, urges him to keep calm and avoid rushing things, or else he would regret it someday. Kakeru refuses to listen and keeps on begging Misuzu to teach him. However, Misuzu could see the haste in his eyes, so she refused to teach him. Elsewhere, Yukiko meets with Yuka and plays around with her and her snacks. Yuka appreciates her smile and Yukiko keeps smiling. As they talk and gist, the bully, Takahisa, from earlier passes by and glances at Yukiko. Yukiko also gets up from her seat and takes a look at him as he passes her by. Yuka gets the weird vibe between them and asks if Yukiko has feelings for Takahisa. However, Yukiko tells him there's no such thing between them. Yukiko quickly changes the topic and places her head on Yuka's boobs to fondle them. Takahisa, on his way to class, bumps into the school nurse who teases him about his affair with Yukiko. Takahisa tells her not to get any fuzzy ideas as there's nothing between him and Yukiko. At that moment, Momono is seen instructing Tadashi on how to arrange books in order. Apparently, both of them just became librarians and Momono wanted to punish him for his perverse thoughts. After making fun of Tadashi, Kakeru and Yuka continue to the school's yard to do their thing. While Yuka watches, Kakeru trains himself in the way of the sword. Misuzu shows up moments later and finds Kakeru deep in training. She decides to tell him a thing or two about swordsmanship. Firstly, she takes him and Yuka to her settlement on the city's outskirts. Misuzu's family was one of the Onmyaji houses that have been protecting the country and its people for generations. Having been exposed to that truth as a youngster, Misuzu knows she has to work her way up the ranks and make sure she gets stronger. As such, she learnt foreign techniques and acquired the 5-hand techniques, which she used to acquire all 5 treasured swords. She summons the swords and shows them all to Yuka and Kakeru. Moving on, she mentions that she fought challengers from different bloodlines just to get her hands on such swords. After acquiring all the swords in a free and fair matchup, she gets chased out of the village as it's taboo for just one person to own all 5 swords. When asked why it was so, Misuzu mentioned that the elders didn't like the fact that the youngest in the house was the sole owner of such swords, more so a woman. To make matters worse, Misuzu had fought with her father in the 4th matchup. However, she made a mistake and stabbed him, which is also prohibited. This made the elders seek revenge against her. So, she fled her locale and came to that place, her mother's house, to rest and avoid confrontation. While explaining her origins, Misuzu leaves out the part where she stabbed her father for fear of being judged. She stops the conversations, seals the swords back in, and begins Kakeru's training. Kakeru keeps training his sword slashes till nightfall. In the meantime, Yuka and Misuzu sit outside to discuss a few things. At one point, Yuka asks Misuzu what happened in the final match. Misuzu tells her about the incident with her father. Her father was never happy with her, seeing as young Misuzu always admired someone who wasn't in their clan anymore. Misao Kusakabe, a former member of Misuzu's clan, was banished because she learnt another foreign technique just like Misuzu did. As such, she was banished. Hopefully, Misuzu can see her again after 20 years of being banished. Before the conversation continues, Kakeru shows up and urges Misuzu to teach him how to wield a sword. Before Misuzu could say anything, Kakeru's right eye started reacting and this sent them to the Red Knight again. This time, Superbia and her people spot them coming, so they quickly dispatch themselves to go fight them while the boss and Superbia stay behind to watch over Lysette. Misuzu, Kakeru and Yuka come prepared as they slash, dice and cut down all enemies in their way. Soon enough, the Black Knights show up to join the fight. They engage Misuzu and her people in a little small talk, but eventually they all clash swords. Misuzu buys Kakeru and Yuka some time to run away. They take it, but then again, one of the Black Knights catches them running and chases after them. The knight spots them cutting a corner. However, when he gets to the corner, he finds no one there. He starts searching everywhere for them and fails to find them. He stays quiet for a few minutes to trick Kakeru into thinking he's gone. Kakeru takes the bait and exposes his location. The knight finds them in the car they were hiding in and smashes it. Before he can deliver the final blow, however, someone else attacks and stops him. Meanwhile, Misuzu has a hard time keeping up with Gura, the other Black Knight. She gets pinned down and almost taken out. Thankfully, someone else showed up to save her. Misuzu cuts out the knight and leaves him for dead. Kakeru opens his eyes shortly after their attacker leaves and finds his sister's ghost checking up on him. Moments later, they return to the real world and Kakeru wakes up from his treatment to find their new ally, Yukiko-chan. Meanwhile, Takahisa is seen fighting the demons in the Red Knight. However, once the time's up, he returns to the real world and finds himself sitting in front of a convenience store. He checks his time to make sure he's not too late and returns to his house. The following day, Yukiko created the Modern Society Studies Club and introduced its new members, Misuzu, Yuka and Kakeru, to the club. While the others join in, Kakeru is seen staring into nothingness as he wonders what could be happening to his sister. Yuka calls him back to order and urges him to participate more in school activities. Yukiko continues cheering everybody on as she raises her hand and smiles cheerfully. Takahisa is seen in the nurse's office getting his injured hand fixed up. The nurse kept on asking intimidating questions which ended up pissing Takahisa the most. Eventually, he blows things out of proportion and insults the nurse, who doesn't take it lightly. She gets very pissed and threatens to harm Takahisa. Luckily for him, he gets the memo and scrams. The nurse chases after him, but she can't catch up to him. In the meantime, Misuzu and the others sit by a table to talk and discuss their recent encounter in the alternate dimension. They wonder what the boss of the demons meant back then when he called them fragments. Yukiko butts and mentions a guy that saved her earlier, the guy who calls himself the Ally of Justice. At that point, Takahisa is seen testing his pyrokinetic powers. The nurse keeps on chasing him, so he's forced to run into a room. There, he bumps into Yukiko and pushes her to the ground. After getting away from the nurse, he takes a look at the room and finds Yukiko and the others. Yukiko, who originally planned to have them all search for the Ally of Justice, puts the search to an end and introduces him to the lot. They take the guy to the rooftop to ask him some questions. Takahisa asks them if they have any special abilities. However, since they don't have anything that interests him, he refuses to join forces with them. After leaving, Misuzu frowns at his weird behaviors and calls him an ill-mannered person. However, Yukiko stops her there and tells her that Takahisa is a very kind person. That night, Misuzu spars with Kakeru and beats him down in the first half of the fight. Kakeru gets back up and pulls himself to fight them more. However, Misuzu stops him there and urges him to put his feelings into the sword and show his resolve. Only then can his sword appreciate his power and fight as his ally. Kakeru thanks her for the lesson and puts in a little more effort. Suddenly, he catches a glimpse of Misuzu's next move, which is to attack Yuka, and rushes towards Yuka to save her. When he snaps back to reality, he finds out Misuzu is still standing. However, she looked puzzled as she struggled to understand what just happened. Initially, she'd planned to attack Yuka just to test Kakeru's resolve. However, since Kakeru read her moves, that must mean his right eye has the power to read into the future. The following day, Kakeru walks Yuka to school as usual. He stops on the way and promises to always be there for Yuka in all her endeavors. Along the line, they're interrupted by the class clown, Tadashi, who's seen making a mess and embarrassing himself as he walks alongside Momono and Kiori. After school, Kakeru meets with Misuzu on her way to the Modern Studies Club. Misuzu thinks about telling Kakeru about his powers. However, she stops midway and gets to the room. There, she finds Yukiko fondling Yuka's breasts, but before they can say anything, they're transported to another world. This time, they find Takahisa engaged in a battle to save himself. After taking down a few small demons, they find out his pyrokinetic power. Shortly afterwards, a Black Knight shows up and threatens to attack them all. Misuzu tries asking for their identity, but then again, the Black Knight has nothing to say to them. So, Misuzu takes out her sword and attacks the Black Knight, who dodges all their strokes. At that point, Avarisha, the boss of the demon world, makes sure everything is clear with Superbia before commencing their plan. Misuzu manages to hold off the Black Knight while the other three watch. Yukiko realizes the danger Misuzu is in, so she takes off her glasses and gets ready to join the fight to help Misuzu. Moments after taking out her glasses, she speeds herself up and attacks the Black Knight at supersonic speeds, slashing him with her knives all over his body. When the Black Knight gets pissed, he catches Yukiko and throws her towards a wall. Misuzu tries checking on her, but then Yukiko shuns her away, almost as if she was a completely different person. After recuperating, she rushes in for another attack. This time, she punctures the Black Knight's head. However, as she jumps into the air to make the deciding blow, Invidia, another Black Knight, shows up and stabs through her chest. After taking care of Yukiko, she joins Ira, the Black Knight, to face the other students in front of them. Just then, Takahisa shows up and burns them up. Just then, it's time to return to the normal world. Misuzu, Yuka, and Kakeru all appear in the same space. Surprisingly, they find Yukiko there almost unharmed. Yukiko takes out her glasses and puts them back. Suddenly, she transforms back to her normal self and explains her hidden ability to the lot. Apparently, she has impressive regenerative abilities and can heal her wounds without any issues. She also tells them that she's immortal and her split personality is the person that takes over when she removes her glasses. Yuka and the others accept her differences and welcome her to join her group. Yukiko hugs them and remembers Takahisa's words to them. She turns and thanks them very much for accepting her. Then, she turns and finds Takahisa trying to sneak off. She thanks him and invites him to join the club when he feels like it. Later on, Kakeru returns outside to train himself. Just then, Yukiko shows up to tell him the bad news: Yuka had just fainted in class. Kakeru quickly rushes to the infirmary to check up on Yuka. Thankfully, he finds her awake and can talk to her. As expected, Yuka urges Kakeru not to worry too much about her. Instead, she asks about what's troubling him. Kakeru urges not to worry too much about him either. They need to focus on the most important thing at hand, and that is getting things back to normal. At that point, the nurse was already weirded out by their lovey-dovey feelings towards each other. Takahisa also gets up from a bed close to Yuka's and heads out of the infirmary. On his way down the stairs, he bumps into Yukiko, who was carrying a few bags of chips. Takahisa helps her up and returns the bag of chips. However, as he walks, he picks one for himself and continues to his class. After class that day, Kakeru returns to the infirmary to check up on Yuka. He finds her getting ready to leave and helps her with it. Suddenly, the nurse, Seiko-sensei, asks Yuka why she's been getting little sleep recently. Just then, Kakeru gets that tingling feeling again. Thankfully, nothing out of the ordinary happens, but then Seiko changes the topic after realizing how sensitive such a topic was to them. However, she does advise Kakeru to sing Yuka lullabies the next time she has trouble sleeping. Kakeru shrieks out of embarrassment as that wasn't his style at all. Seiko, however, tells them the importance of singing lullabies and even mentions that she does it herself for the kid she adopted to be hers. When asked who the kid is, Seiko tells them it's Takahisa, the delinquent who stormed out earlier. Both students are shocked as they ask for more information. Seiko chuckles and narrates her first meeting with Takahisa. It all happened one night several years ago after she just escaped a police chase. Seiko used to be an underground biker gangsta. As she hides in the alleyway away from the cops, she finds a bag of chips on the ground. Upon picking it up, Takahisa, who was a stray kid, lunges at her and tries to reclaim his bag of chips. Seiko sees the horrible state he's in and feels sorry for the poor boy. So, she brings him closer to him and adopts him to be hers that night. Up until that day, she still regrets her decision that night. Nonetheless, she's still happy that she could take him off the streets, despite him being an ungrateful delinquent. She opens the blinds and finds her son eating with Yukiko. She spectates them a little bit before closing it to attend to the duo. On the rooftop of the school building, Tadashi and Kaori are seen trying to get acquainted with a stray cat. The cat, however, scratches the hell out of Tadashi and runs over to Momono's side to say hi. Momono picks up the cat and checks it before adopting it. She lifts the cat into the sky and says something about the alternate dimension. The duo near her hear her talk and ask for more information. However, she refuses to tell them what she means. In the meantime, Kakeru and Yuka catch up to Misuzu in the hallway. Kakeru rushes towards her and asks to continue training. However, Misuzu pauses training and tells them to come meet the last person. Upon getting to their club room, the Takahisa were eating some snacks. Kakeru sits directly opposite him, hoping to get closer to him. However, Takahisa spites him by spilling some drink on his trousers. Kakeru gets up and gives Takahisa a disgusting look. Takahisa, however, gets up, smirks, and sits back down. Before Kakeru can react, Misuzu shows up with their new member, a Class B mute called Kyukuri. She lets Kyukuri sit at their table so she can hear them explain the perks of their little group. Yukiko greets Kyukuri by fondling her breasts. Yuka stops her from doing such a nefarious thing and then brings things back to order. Just then, Yukiko introduces their new club motto, "For the sake of friends and tomorrow." She says the phrase in her native language and sends warm smiles to everyone. The girls accept the motto and Yukiko asks them to say it all together. However, Takahisa gets pissed and leaves the group out of embarrassment. Yukiko tries to follow him but Kakeru tells her to leave the dumbass be. Takahisa gets on his motorcycle and leaves the school. Meanwhile, Kakeru steps outside to think about the new motto. Yuka joins him and manages to make him smile. The duo have a good time as they get their snacks from the vending machine. Takahisa is seen riding his bike down the highway, almost as if he was leaving the city. However, he finds a weird invisible wall encircling the city and forming a dome up top and tries to pass through it. His bike gets destroyed but then he manages to survive the fall. He checks around and finds other creatures leaving the city. It was then that he realized that he was trapped with the others in the city. Back in the club's building, Kakeru asks Misuzu to teach him the way of the sword before he gets back home. Yukiko takes Kyukuri's clothes to the bathroom so she can return them to her. Misuzu gets a little pissed by Kakeru's haste, so she decides to teach him a lesson. She intentionally drops a napkin on the floor and urges Kakeru to come after her. Kakeru rushes in blindly but then Misuzu urges him to stop. She informs him about his habit of forgetting his surroundings and attacking blindly. Kakeru learns the valuable lesson of calmness that day. However, before they could do anything else, his right eye glows and they're transported back to the alternate dimension. This time, Invidia and Ira were there to stop them. Misuzu buys some time for Kakeru and Yuka to escape as she fights Invidia. In the meantime, Takahisa saves Yukiko from getting eaten in the bathroom. As they rush further away from danger, Kakeru encounters Ira. Ira holds him by his neck and throws him away from Yuka. Kakeru immediately gets back on his feet, holds his sword and gets back in place. He begins to panic as he wonders what he's to do. Just then, one of Misuzu's swords hit the ground from above and Kakeru remembers Misuzu's teachings. He calms himself and controls his emotions. Suddenly, his right eye activates itself and Kakeru removes his eye patch. Ira tried attacking him but then Kakeru could already read his movements. He evades all of his attacks until he finds his opening and erases Ira from reality. Lysette wakes up in her crystal and informs the demon boss about the awakening of the invincible king's power, the Eye of Aeon. Moments after delivering that attack, Kakeru's nerve endings fail him and become immobilized. Kakeru gets a seizure and falls to the ground. As he falls unconscious, Kakeru has a very bad dream. In the dream, he finds himself standing in a labyrinth full of dead bodies with the invincible king, Verard. Verard introduces himself and promises to bring war and strife to everything Kakeru knows. After getting back to the normal world, everyone gathers around Kakeru to make sure he's okay. Kakeru, on the other hand, struggles for his life as the effects of the Eye of Aeon keep taking a toll on his body. Yuka advises taking him to a hospital but then Misuzu knows that they would be wasting time by doing that. So, she decides to use a secret healing technique to save Kakeru. She sees that everyone is outside and then begins the ritual on Kakeru after stripping him naked. Kyukuri shows up outside shortly and hugs Yuka. Yuka lets down the waterworks while Misuzu recites an incantation to save Kakeru's life. As she recites the incantations, Kakeru's body reacts harshly to her words and soon, a magic circle is formed. By that time, everyone was already inside waiting for a miracle to happen. Yuka gets a little sad and blames herself for Kakeru's condition. Apparently, if she'd awakened her own power, then maybe she wouldn't be so weak to need protection from someone else. Eventually, she gets up from her chair and rushes over to the room to check up on Kakeru. She stands at the entrance and listens to what Misuzu is saying to her guy. When it comes to it, Misuzu also strips herself naked and places her hand on Kakeru's sweaty body. In a split second, her hands glow and Kakeru's eyes finally open again. He gets into another dream with Verard still in the same labyrinth. Verard advises him to give up his life so the pain can stop. However, Kakeru's will to live was way stronger than anyone would imagine, so he refuses to do such a thing. The following morning, Kakeru wakes up hale and hearty. He finds Misuzu sleeping on his leg completely drained of energy. Yuka, on the other hand, places some food near the entrance and takes a peek into the room to check up on Kakeru. Sadly, she finds Kakeru and Misuzu dangerously close together, stark naked at that too. Yuka gets the wrong idea and returns to the living room. Shortly after, Misuzu wakes up and gets dressed. Although she's a little shaken by the ritual, she still manages to stand. When asked how she healed him, Misuzu tells Kakeru that she had to enhance his self-regeneration ability, and his body did the rest. Yukiko wakes up at that moment and gets down to meet Kyukuri. Kyukuri makes a joke about her rumpled hair and Yukiko gets a good laugh. Soon, Misuzu shows up in the dining room and asks Yuka after greeting the two there. Yukiko tells her Yuka was acting a little strangely earlier, but she's currently outside. Misuzu sighs and thanks Yukiko for bringing the dish outside. Yukiko smiles and tells her Yuka was the one who brought the dishes outside. Just then, Misuzu gets an idea of what's going on. In the meantime, Kakeru finds Yuka on the staircase on the patio outside and approaches her to greet her. Yuka, however, greeted him sheepishly and rushed to the bathroom to wash her face. After doing that, she looks at her reflection in the mirror and reminds herself to trust Kakeru. She then joins the others shortly so they can get ready to get to school. She observes the way Kakeru is behaving around Misuzu and becomes completely jealous. She suddenly runs out of the room and heads straight for school. On their way to school, Tadashi gets bullied again by Momono and Kaori again. Just then, Yuka rushes and Kakeru rushes past them. All efforts to call for their attention are futile. All three of them wonder what could be wrong, but then again, it's not their problem. Misuzu and the others also make their way to school. On their way, they discuss Verard, Kakeru, and the Eye of Aeon. Apparently, Verard used to be the strongest in all the land. However, everything changed at one point when he allowed himself to be deceived by a witch who tricked him into destroying his kingdom. After hearing the story from Yukiko, Misuzu gets a sudden flashback and remembers that Lysette is also an immortal witch. Yukiko asks if that's why Yuka was so troubled. Sadly, it wasn't. Kakeru catches up to Yuka on the rooftop. He stops her and asks her what was wrong. Yuka tries to explain herself to him, but thankfully, he gets it. Kakeru reassures her that nothing out of the ordinary happened between them the previous night. However, Yuka asked him to prove it to her by kissing her lips. Sadly, Kakeru isn't ready for such a thing. Meanwhile, Yukiko and Misuzu discuss leaving the city to escape. However, Takahisa shows up and tells them about the wall. As they struggle to understand what he is talking about, Seiko shows up to listen to their conversation. However, Takahisa became disrespectful again and Seiko dragged him away. Misuzu is left puzzled to figure out what he meant by the wall. Just then, the tingling feeling comes again and they're all teleported to the other dimension. This time, Superbia had already recruited another Black Knight, Acedia. They urge him not to disappoint them this time around. Misuzu finds everybody except Yuka and hands Kakeru a sword to fight with. Takahisa, on the other hand, defeats the small fry and asks for something stronger. He gets his wish as Nvidia shows up again to take him down. Acedia, on the other hand, faces Misuzu and the others. Before fighting, Misuzu asks Acedia why they call them fragments. However, Acedia refuses to give a straight answer. Instead, he condemns their very existence and wishes they would die. He prepares himself for an attack and uses his fire element. However, Misuzu counters it with water but still gets hit. Kakeru tries to use his right eye again, but this time, he feels the same pain. Yukiko tries to attack, but then Kyukuri shows up out of nowhere and uses her spirit chains to puncture and slice Acedia to pieces. Acedia's body gets back up and the Scholastica element powering his life force flees the scene, leaving Nvidia alone to fight all five of them. Takahisa joins them shortly after Nvidia flees the scene to tell them the bad news. Turns out Yuka may have been kidnapped. Hearing this, Kakeru races to the infirmary immediately to save Yuka. As she races past the infirmary, Yuka keeps recalling her final moment with Kakeru. Tired from the heartache, she falls to her knees and lets out a terrifying scream. Kakeru and the others finally get to the infirmary, but unfortunately, they find the place completely destroyed. Kakeru searches the rubble desperately to find Yuka. However, Yukiko calms his balls, telling him that she doesn't smell blood. To make the search easier, Misuzu decides to split up the team just so they can find her. Since Kakeru and Takahisa look quite beaten up, Misuzu tells them to search the school for Yuka while they search the other places. If they can find her there, Takahisa is to send a flame signal for everyone to reconvene in front of the infirmary. After that, the team split up and headed out to search for Yuka. Elsewhere, Lysette wakes up from her eternal slumber and checks around to make sure no one is in the room with her. She then notices a crack in the crystal she was imprisoned in and begins to enlarge the crack little by little. Kakeru staggers a little as he searches the school desperately for Yuka. Takahisa holds him back up to make sure he's okay. He recalls his last memory with Yuka and feels bad for chickening out at the last moment. Takahisa chuckles and tells him not to feel bad about himself. He's also tried asking Yukiko out once in the past. However, Yukiko couldn't accept him because of her dark past. She fears Takahisa would look at her differently if he finds out about the horrible things she did in the past. Takahisa smiles and accepts his fate. Just then, some little demons attack them in the classroom they're in. Takahisa takes care of the demons and paves the way forward. Misuzu, on the other hand, is seen inching closer and closer to the center of the dimension. She takes a look at the black moon and realizes that it's getting closer to the ground. In the meantime, Yukiko, while searching for Yuka, finds some demons feasting on a body. She ignores them and walks forward a little bit. She finds Yuka speaking to herself up front and gets closer to her. At that moment, Avarisha notices the witch's attempt at escaping. So, he leaves taking care of the fragments in Superbia's hands and heads back to the prison to prevent the witch from escaping. After he's gone, Superbia summons Invidia to come help them fight. Elsewhere, Yukiko sits down with Yuka to discuss things with her. Yuka expresses her sadness over how powerless she is. Yukiko, however, tells her not to worry too much about such a thing. Instead, she should be glad that she has someone to protect her through and through. She then tries to cheer Yuka up. However, when she sees that's not working, she decides to tell Yuka her past. Things weren't always so rosy for Yukiko. As a youngster, she was forced to live a life of strife and war. Due to her immortality, the village she was living in Drasvania utilized her as a weapon of mass destruction. Yukiko had no choice but to follow orders as she believed she was protecting her family and friends. She killed massive amounts of people in her lifetime and created the alternate personality that only takes over her when she takes her glasses off. She walks forward and begs Yuka to be content with her sanity so she doesn't turn out to be like her younger self. Yuka realizes the truth in Yukiko's words and rushes up to hug her with tears in her eyes. In the next scene, Avarisha returns to the room, strengthening the crystals trapping Lysette. His power causes a bright white light to show above the room, a white light that all the students could see. By that time, Superbia was already busy reviving Scholastica to get back to fighting for them. She puts the poor Black Knight into a world of pain and throws him in front of Kakeru and Takahisa. After he disappears, Superbia appears from behind them and attacks. Kakeru and Takahisa are unharmed in her initial attack, but then again, they're well aware of her presence now. Misuzu arrives just in time to give Kakeru one of her swords. Now that they're three, they stand a better chance of defeating Superbia. Superbia evens the playing field by summoning Invidia to come forward and join the fight. Invidia shows up shortly and disappears into thin air. Kakeru uses his Eye of Aeon's power to predict the future and figure out her next attack. A split second later, Invidia attacks and Kakeru dodges it and counters the attack. However, Invidia dodges the attack unscathed and prepares for another one. Misuzu engages Superbia in a little discussion to find her true aim and objective. From their discussion, Misuzu finds out that Superbia is the lost swordswoman that she adored when she was younger. She calls her out and makes her reveal herself to be Misoa Kusakabe. Seeing this, Misuzu is devastated as nothing seems to be making sense at the moment. Takahisa manages to land a hit on Invidia's back and disable her for a little while. Hyukuri shows up just in time and uses her spirit chains to lock Invidia and render her useless. After realizing that Misuzu isn't in a good condition to fight, Superbia leaves the fragments in Invidia's hands. Invidia decides to use her last resort. She creates a barrier entrapping Kakeru and everyone in with her while she activates her self-destruct button. All efforts to stop her and the barrier are proven futile. Just as she's about to blow herself up, Yuka shows and awakens her power. From the top of the school's building, she lets out another terrifying scream and lets out a pink light that nullifies both Invidia's explosive power and her allies' power. Invidia is now rendered completely useless. Yukiko quickly kills her to prevent her from causing any more harm. Once Invidia's been taken care of, Yuka smiles as she is finally able to protect Kakeru. She faints a while later in the building where she was. The next scene shows a flashback illustrating how distraught Lysette was after she found out about her lover, Verard's death, back in the medieval times. After crying her heart out, she makes a promise to end the rotten world they all live in. After their ordeal with Kakeru and the others, Avarisha and Superbia have a little discussion about the fragments who are unaware of their own identities in the alternate dimension. Although they're weak and powerless, they still have to be destroyed to prevent great evil from befalling the world. The next morning, Yuka wakes up and finds Kakeru sitting near her bed. Kakeru, who was fast asleep, wakes up immediately and thanks Yuka for saving everyone back in the alternate dimension. Elsewhere, Misuzu and Kyukuri discuss Yukiko's whereabouts. Once she finds out Yukiko is in her room, Misuzu decides to stay home for the day so everyone can get some rest. Soon after, she asks Kyukuri to go get her some tea so she heads out of the room. When she's gone, Takahisa asks Misuzu for her thoughts about Yuka's newfound power. Misuzu tells him that although her power is quite dangerous, she fears Yuka may have to use it once again in the future. She then moves on to spew some other things that piss Takahisa off. He kicks the table and walks out on Misuzu. Kakeru finds Kyukuri in the kitchen and gets a little defensive. Seeing as he suspects her to be the sender of the message, he begs her to spare Yuka and take him instead. That's if she was sent there to defeat them. Kyukuri tries to explain herself, but when she shows Kakeru her words on the pamphlet, Bro is already gone. Kyukuri had intended to tell Kakeru that she no longer remembered her own past. Takahisa heads over to Yukiko's room to check up on her. Kakeru, however, heads outside and finds Misuzu staring into the abyss. She warns Kakeru to keep his guard as she senses those black knights to be around their vicinity. Kakeru takes her word for it and promises to stay alert. Meanwhile, Yukiko complains to Takahisa, telling him something she did to Kakeru while in the alternate dimension. Apparently, while she was transformed to her other self, she wounded Kakeru on his back, so now she fears that she may lose control of herself again. Takahisa stops her there and urges her not to worry too much about things that don't matter. What she should be worried about is how to win their fight with the Black Knights. Yukiko gets a little emotional and admits her love to everybody. Takahisa gets irritated and tries to leave the room. However, Yukiko reminds him of the people like Seiko, who also love him and wish him well. Up next, Misuzu and Kakeru meet up in the dojo near the house to discuss the forbidden magic technique, Jehu, that Misao, aka Superbia, used when she was little. Misuzu tells Kakeru about her recent realization that Misao is Superbia. However, Kakeru didn't believe her initially, as Misao would have died a long time ago. Misuzu, however, reminds him of the nature of time in the alternate dimension. Since time practically comes to a stop in the dimension, it's very possible that Misao is Superbia. Kakeru begins to connect all the dots and it suddenly makes sense. Misuzu then shows him the mark that was carved into her body as a warning a few days before their first meeting in the Red Knight. At present, she's in no position to defeat her. However, if Kakeru can drink her own blood, then maybe they can stand a chance. Misuzu slashes her hand and urges Kakeru to drink it. Kakeru drinks the blood without knowing that Yuka is just outside the door spying on him and Misuzu. Immediately she sees Kakeru sucking something from Misuzu's hand, and she faints. After that, a flashback is shown where the witch Lysette stares at the moon with her glowing white hair, calling the name of her lover, Verard. On his way to school the following morning, Takahisa runs into his foster mother, who drags his ear to the infirmary again. After getting scolded, Takahisa apologizes and asks for her permission to go somewhere to his friend's place. Seiko gets a little emotional and begins to reminisce on old times. Takahisa asks her to get off it so he can move on to class. Seiko obliges and he takes his leave. While in class, Tadashi pulls a love letter stunt in class. He makes his love letter into a paper plane and throws it at Momono. Momono tears the letter to pieces and embarrasses the class clown, Tadashi, in front of everyone. Soon after, she feels something weird and takes a bathroom break. After she's granted, Momono heads outside and sees a black crow watching over her. She destroys the bird and continues moving on. Back in the dojo, Yuka wakes up and hears the sound of wooden swords clashing in the room inside. Upon checking, she finds the duo coming at each other like they were enemies. In the end, Kakeru smacks his senpai on the head and wounds her. Yuka quickly hurries in and gives her a napkin to clean her blood with. As she does that, Yuka bends down and licks Misuzu's blood off her forehead, thereby freaking everybody out. In the next scene, Yukiko shows up in school to meet Takahisa and apologize for her behavior earlier on. Takahisa urges her to take her drink and quit explaining herself. He never for once thought any less of her, so she should be free. Yukiko drops her drink and hugs Takahisa tightly with tears on her face. Seiko gets out of her hiding place and smiles at her foster son. Takahisa thanks her as she walks by for giving him a good life. At that time, Misuzu and Kyukuri leave Kakeru and Yuka alone in the house as they head off to find Yukiko. On their way, Misuzu gets curious and asks Kyukuri if she had something to do with Kakeru in the past. Rather than answer, Kyukuri just stares blankly at Misuzu and keeps walking. In the meantime, Kakeru is seen protecting Yuka from a lizard. As she hugs him, Yuka wishes they could be like that forever. However, they hear something move in the corridor and Kakeru gets up to check it out, despite Yuka warning him not to. Kakeru gets to the top and finds Momono waiting for him. When she finally sees him, she attacks him and introduces herself as a warrior from the Holy Office of the Index. She tells Kakeru her truth, which is Ursula of the Demon, and explains further that she was sent there to investigate the demon's awakening. Meanwhile, Takahisa and Yukiko roam around the school's classroom chatting and discussing the meal Seiko is to treat them to later that day. They get to Seiko's office and open the door to check up on her. What they find is totally unexpected. Takahisa and Yukiko find Seiko's bloody body hanging upside down with 2 different blades sunk into her. Takahisa initially thinks reality is playing a trick on him. However, he soon believes it to be real when he finds Superbia near the body smiling at him and Yukiko. Superbia removes her swords from Seiko's body and makes a move to attack Takahisa. Yukiko removes her glasses and lets her alternate personality take over just so she can stop Superbia. In the next scene, Kakeru uses his eye's power to predict Momono's moves. He dodges all her attacks and asks for her true intent towards him. Momono releases her levitation spell and admits to herself that indeed Kakeru had grown into a formidable force. Meanwhile, Takahisa holds his dead foster mother in his hands while Yukiko keeps Superbia at bay. He loses control over his powers and lets himself loose. Superbia takes the fight outside and makes sure Takahisa follows her. Misuzu and Kyukuri, while on their way to their destination, recall their recent experience in the alternate dimension. The time when Invidia tried to kill herself. Misuzu realizes just how badly the enemy wants them dead. For this to happen now, this could only mean that they're testing their teamwork. Suddenly, the city's emergency alarm starts blaring and Yukiko shows up. Misuzu notices her demeanor and asks her what happened. Before she could say anything, Takahisa and Superbia started destroying the city. In the meantime, Momono keeps talking in parables, telling Kakeru that he's the only person who can destroy the demon he awakened. Kakeru asks for a clearer explanation, but before she can give it, she finds a lizard sent there by the Black Knights to eavesdrop on their conversation. Momono destroys the lizard and realizes her mistake. Just then, Superbia arrives at Misuzu's residence. After hearing about Seiko's death from Yukiko, Misuzu decides they have to do something about Takahisa as soon as possible. Moreover, she feels Superbia's presence and quickly rushes back to her house. On her way there, she gets a very odd feeling, almost as if something bad had happened. She arrives at her house in time to arm herself and Kakeru. Superbia again levels the playing field by summoning Black Knight's Kakeru and his peers formerly defeated. Kakeru heads off to fight the knights while Misuzu fights Superbia in her human form. As she faces her idol in battle, Misuzu knows she has to fight like her life depends on it. She can't afford to lose. She stands and observes her surroundings a little and she notices the strong aura around Misao. She searched the field for her ally but couldn't find any. Somewhere within the city, Yukiko finds Takahisa throwing his fireballs at an illusion of Superbia. She begs him to stop destroying the city, but sadly, it is already too late as he can't control himself anymore. Despite Yukiko's pleas, his powers refuse to subside. He eventually succumbs to doing the impossible, which is to attack Yukiko and have her kill him out of self-defense. Maybe that would finally put an end to his miserable life. He shoots and intentionally misses Yukiko, forcing her to take off her glasses. When she does, the Red Knight appears and everyone's transported to another world. Momono gets inside the house and finds Yuka sitting and waiting for Kakeru. Momono tells her that her boyfriend is currently fighting the enemy for the fate of the world. Yuka gets up immediately and tries to go find Kakeru. However, Momono stops her and asks her to allow Kakeru to fight this fight on his own. Yuka understands her plight, so she gets back to her seat. By that time, Kakeru destroyed the makeshift Akidia that Superbia made. He joins Misuzu back on the battlefield to face the invincible Misawa. While sipping tea and listening to Yuka's story of herself and Kakeru, the house suddenly shakes and Momono checks outside, hoping things are okay. Kakeru, who's still fighting on the battlefield, uses his power again and feels the after effects. Kyukuri shows up to help and Misuzu summons the gods in her sword to come to help her in her fight against Misawa. To her surprise, Superbia, Aka Misawa, breaks her sword in half and renders her useless. Misuzu stands there shocked and open to attacks. Superbia finds her opening and tries to end Misuzu once and for all. However, Kakeru used his eyes to predict her move again and managed to stop her sword from hitting Misuzu with his own sword. Superbia realizes that Kakeru has drunk Misuzu's blood, so she retreats for now and sends them out of the alternate dimension. Once she's gone, Kakeru takes Misuzu back to the house. There, they meet with Momono, who explains the whole truth to them. Momono explains to them that the Black Knights they've been fighting against are actually the good guys sent by the Holy Office to keep Lysette at bay. As for Superbia, Momono asks Misuzu to enlighten them about her more. Misuzu, however, buries her head in her hands and cries about her powerlessness in fighting Superbia that day. In the meantime, Kyukuri is seen in Yukiko's room comforting the troubled girl after losing the love of her life, Takahisa. Kyukuri opts to use magic to induce sleep in Yukiko since she's too distraught to put herself to sleep. Momono, on the other hand, keeps explaining the nature of all the students to them. Apparently, the Black Knights were coming after them to destroy the fragments of the Demon Stone of the Void, which holds vast power. When asked what that means, Momono tells them that they all have about 7 different Demon Void Stones embedded into their bodies, herself, and the witch, Lysette included. After listening to the names of all the different fragment stones, Kakeru asks her if the fragment stones are that powerful. Momono explains that the stones are quite powerless when they're apart. The real problem is what happens when they're combined into one stone. If that happens, then Lysette, who's the mastermind behind all this happening, would have all the power to destroy the world. Way back before she was sealed, Lysette, or Lyslot, had always been planning to destroy the world ever since her lover, Verard, died. To stop her from wiping humanity, the Holy Office of the Index was created. They managed to break her power into 7 different fragments and send them off into 7 separate worlds. If she's to regain her power, she would need all 7 fragments to gather in one place. Kakeru thinks about this a little and asks Momono what happens now that Takahisa has been killed. Would this mean that she can't destroy the world anymore? Momono tells him that although Takahisa is dead, Lysette can still activate the Pitfall of Hades and destroy the world using Kakeru's Eye of Aeon. Yuka interrupts their discussion and brings them all some tea to cool off. Misuzu takes her own tea and gets a little worried about their chances in this coming battle. Then, she takes a peek into her own tea and finds a razor inside it. This must mean that Yuka just tried to kill her, rather than make a scene. Misuzu excuses herself and heads back to her quarters. After she's gone, Yuka bends down and asks Kakeru to sleep with her. Kakeru sidesteps her question and gets outside to chill out. Soon after, Yuka approaches him in her underwear and tries to get him to sleep with her. Kakeru refuses to do such a thing, but then Momono advises what Yuka says so they can continue their discussion. Kakeru lets Yuka sleep on his body while Momono continues her explanation. She tells Kakeru about Lysette and Verard's relationship back when things were rosy for the witch. Kakeru was very shocked that a witch like that could fall in love. Moving on, she mentions that Verard was eventually killed by one of his own men. Hearing this, Lysette drowned herself in sorrow and decided to carry out her lover's wish, which was to destroy the world. She began her conquest to send the world to the ground. However, the Holy Knights were there to stop her. 64 years ago, some of the disciples managed to seal her off into the alternate dimension. They sacrificed themselves for the sake of the world and transformed into horrible beings now known as the Black Knights. Momono continues and tells Kakeru the reason why the Black Knights are so intent on killing him. As it seems, they fear that Kakeru isn't strong enough to control the Eye of Aeon when the power fully awakens. To avoid taking any risks, they set out to kill the vessel of the Eye of Aeon before it's too late. Momono admits that she was also sent to kill Kakeru. Initially, she didn't think much of the world. However, after seeing the world and the people striving to make something of themselves, she changes her mind and decides to put her faith in Kakeru's strength. She believes Kakeru has what it takes to control Verard and the Eye of Aeon. Kakeru thanks her and promises not to let her down. Later on, he gets back inside to check up on Yukiko. He finds that she's asleep and leaves her be. On his way back to his own room, Kyukuri stops him to ask if he's alright. Kakeru assures her that he's good to go. Then, he apologizes for being harsh to her the other day. Kyukuri accepts his apology and lets him go. Next up, Kakeru visits Misuzu in her dojo. There, he finds her staring at a bleak candlelight and asks her what the matter is. Misuzu recounts just how powerless she felt when she faced Misao back on the battlefield. Misao is a person who learns from people. She, on the other hand, learnt all she knows in isolation. She regrets not being strong enough to bring Misao down and wishes that she got stronger through the years. Kakeru stops her from her demeaning remarks and reminds her to always keep calm and find the silver lining out of every bad situation. Suddenly, Misuzu's face lights up and she thanks Kakeru for helping her out of her problem. As a reward, she cuts herself and urges Kakeru to come suck a little of her blood. When he does, she hugs him tightly and cries softly. When she's done, she and Kakeru head back to the living room. Kakeru finds Yuka there sitting and waiting for him and talks to her. Yuka, after seeing Misuzu enter the room, takes Kakeru out to another room. Meanwhile, Yukiko gives Takahisa one last look and finally realizes that she is in love with him. This makes cry as she's sad she didn't realize it sooner. While they're gone, Momono takes her time to explain the concept of the forbidden magic the Holy Knights used to divide and seal Lysette's power. Apparently, the magic seal caused her power to be broken into 7 different fragments that they sent to 7 different dimensions. These fragments, which were embedded in them all, were summoned into the Red Knight and unfortunately, returned to the same world shortly after. Momono explains that she's been trying to find out why but just couldn't figure it out. At that instant, Yuka desperately tries to kiss Kakeru. This time, Kakeru graces her lips with his and enjoys the moment. On the other hand, Misuzu keeps wondering whose world they're all in. After their kiss, Yuka urges Kakeru to forget about his dead sister and embrace her instead. Kakeru considers doing such a thing and Kukuri simultaneously disappears near Misuzu. Before they can make sense of anything, the Red Knight teleports them to the other dimension. Misuzu searches Yukiko's room for her but doesn't find her there. Apparently, she'd already gone to the Crystal Tower to handle Superbia and Avarisha by herself. While the others go to search for her, Yuka urges Kakeru to stay behind with her. Just then, some demons show up and attack them but Yuka uses all her power to stop them and faints for a little while. Kakeru places her in a locker and goes after the others to search for Yukiko. Yukiko, however, gets caught in one of Superbia's traps and pays dearly for it. Superbia stabs her with her sword and leaves her for dead. Realizing that she could heal herself with her fragment stone, Superbia takes the stone from her stomach and leaves her lying in a puddle of her own blood. Kakeru and the others arrive by that time and attack Superbia. They manage to cut off the stone from her hand. Yuka picks up the stone and throws it to Lysette. Lysette takes the stone and merges it with herself. She gains some of her power back which she uses to break herself out of the crystal prison and return to her true form. She condemns the fragments of her power smiling at her and checks her side to see Yuka smiling and thanking her stars for freeing the witch. Kakeru keeps wondering why Yuka would do such a thing. However, Yuka only looks at him and smiles. Kakeru uses his eye to see the future. In the one he sees, Yuka is stabbed by Lysette and her fragment Voidstone stolen from her. Kakeru tries to save Yuka but it's already too late as Yuka is already going unconscious. Eventually, Kakeru loses Yuka in his own arms. He screams out in his loud voice as he mourns his dead friend. Lysette moves on to take the remaining Voidstones in the Eye of Aeon. However, Avarisha isn't about to let that happen. So, he opens a portal and transports them all to another region of the alternate dimension. Only Momono stayed behind to stop Lysette. Kakeru and Misuzu, on the other hand, appear in a desolate part of town as Kakeru keeps shouting Yuka's name. Misuzu urges him to calm down and keep his wits about him. When he's calm, she explains the concept of the 7 realms to him and mentions to him that they're currently in Yuka's world. Kakeru decides to confirm whether or not Yuka's existence is still in this world. So, he calls his friends, Tadashi and Kaori, to meet Kakeru. Kakeru asks them if they still remember Yuka and they tell him yes. Realizing that she's still alive, Kakeru heaves a sigh of relief. The look on his face makes Misuzu a little disappointed. Still, she decides to go with Kakeru's wish without any complaint. Up next, the fight between the witch and humanity's last hope begins. Avarisha transforms himself into a dragon and shoots fireballs at Lysette. However, Lysette counters the magic with attacks of her own. Misuzu and Kakeru convene at the school to discuss strategy. Misuzu reminds Kakeru not to be too reckless as Lysette could still use his eye to open the pitfall to Hades. With a sad look on her face, she manages to convince herself to fight alongside Kakeru, even if he doesn't love her the way she loves him. High up in the Red Knight, Lysette tries stealing Momono's fragment away from her. However, Kakeru's sister's guardian angel, Apraxia, joins the fight and prevents her from doing that. Lysette welcomes her to the team and prepares herself to fight all 3 of them at once. Misuzu and Kakeru get to the top of the tower to check their world one more time. They see the Black Moon get dangerously close to the Earth and prepare themselves to fight. Misuzu tells Kakeru to be ready to fight Lysette to win when she finally comes for his eye. By that time, Lysette gets pinned by Superbia who holds her directly in the path of Avarisha's fireball. Avarisha fires one gigantic fireball that affects both Lysette and Superbia. The resulting pain makes Superbia scream her lungs out. In the meantime, Kakeru gets cold feet and realizes that they can't win against Lysette. Now what do? Misuzu comes up with a weird idea, an idea that allows 2 people of Kyusuke blood to merge together by having sexual relations. Kakeru realizes what she's about to say but he just couldn't betray Yuka like that. So, he steps back and refuses to do such a thing. However, Misuzu gets very close to him and promises to die for him in her next battle. Kakeru finally succumbs to Misuzu's compulsion. In the next scene, Misuzu and Kakeru are seen naked and doing the love ritual thing. They keep at it for minutes on end until a path to the Red Knight opens in front of them. Before they can go through it, however, Misao shows up and breaks the bad news to them. Avarisha, the only person she loves in this world, is already dead. As such, there's no need to live in this world anymore. She tells them that Momono took her own life and Lysette is on her way there to recover the Eye of Aeon. Just then, she lets out a depressing laughter and then disappears. Shortly after, Yuka passes through the pathway to meet Kakeru. She tricks Kakeru into coming close to her. Little did Kakeru know that that wasn't really Yuka. When he finds out, it's already too late. Lysette stabs Kakeru with her sword and hugs him. She welcomes her Verard back to reality and wishes to take the eye for herself. In a flashback to the medieval times, Verard and the witch, Lyslot, stand atop a building as they gaze upon their burning land. Lyslot hugs her king and urges him to destroy the humans. After the flashback ends, Lyslot takes the Eye of Aeon for herself and begins the destruction of the entire world. Moments before the world faces total destruction, Kakeru pauses his prediction for the Eye of Aeon. Turns out all the things that happened, the love ritual with Misuzu, Yuka dying, and the like, all never happened as Kakeru was just seeing into the future. Once he's regained his sight, Kakeru makes a stand against Lysette. Since he already knows what will happen, he makes sure to save Yuka first before worrying about what will happen to himself. Lysette sees this and turns over to attack Kakeru. Kakeru unsheathes his sword and decides to do the impossible. If he kills himself, then the Eye of Aeon dies with him and Lysette's plan gets foiled forever. Kakeru turns his sword and stabs his neck. Suddenly, he finds himself in one of his childhood memories. In this memory, it's Christmas and Kakeru stands in front of a window pane and checks out his elder sister supervising the children as if it was Christmas. He walks a few meters forward and finds his younger self in a room reading a book on his own. Shortly after, little Yuka walks in to check up on him. She asks him for the book he's reading and Kakeru tells her a little information from the book. Yuka laughs and pets his head. Just then, Kakeru is taken to another memory. This time, Yuka protected him from the bullies in his school who put tacks into his shoes. After school that day, Yuka went to visit Kakeru. His elder sister found her by the entrance and asked what she was doing there. Yuka tells her she's there to see Kakeru. Soon after, Kakeru opens the door and Yuka enters the house to play with him. After the death of his sister, Kakeru finds himself pushing everybody away from himself. Only Yuka was there for him. At this point, Kakeru begins to tear up as he just realizes how much Yuka did for him in the past. He wakes up to reality and finds himself sleeping close to Yuka with Misuzu near him. Misuzu tells him that Yuka had used her power to nullify the sword moments before it got into his throat. Unleashing her power made Lyslot lose her power as well. In a split second, Momono teleported them to the room they were in and made sure they were alright. Misuzu scolds Kakeru for trying to end his own life. Kakeru frowns and suddenly recalls all the memories he just experienced. He strengthens his resolve and promises to be there for Yuka till the very end. Misuzu gets up and sheds a little tear for she knows the person she loves so much doesn't love her back. Just then, Momono and Abraxas arrive in the room. Misuzu is shocked to see Kukuri, so they ask her about her identity. Abraxas introduces herself and urges Momono to tell them the entire truth. Turns out Momono could actually travel through space and time. Over the years, she traveled to all 6 different worlds alongside this one and told all the Kukuris in those worlds the truth. This means that if she hadn't told Kakeru's sister the entire truth, then maybe she wouldn't have had the urge to end her life as Kukuri killed herself to keep the fragment stones safe. She even attempted to kill her brother, Kakeru, as well, just so that the Eye of Aeon would be lost forever. Hearing this, Kakeru is understandably shaken and annoyed at Momono. Just then, Abraxas admits to killing one of the Kakuris in the world. However, Kakeru turned out to be just a normal human and not the holder of the Eye of Aeon. Momono moves on and explains that she initially told all the Kukuris in the world simply because she didn't know which Kakeru had the Eye of Aeon. At this point, Kakeru gets seriously pissed. But he calms down a little. Misuzu checks the clock beside her and finds out that it's actually running. Before she says anything, Yuka is abducted by the witch and taken to the rooftop of the school. When they get to the rooftop, they find the witch Lysette there. Lysette orders Kakeru to come forward if he still wants to see Yuka alive. Kakeru inches closer to her and Lysette licks his eyes. Suddenly, the Eye of Aeon begins to react to Lysette's touch and the Black Knights show up to help. After the big fight, Momono dies and surrenders her fragment to be used by the lot. Kakeru collects the fragment from Abraxas before she disappears. Superbia explains the reason why Momono surrendered her fragment. Since Momono could travel through space and time, she could use that power to send Lysette to the gap between dimensions. This way, she would be trapped in limbo forever. Misuzu recites some incantations and summons the life-eating sword, Yasutuna. She is prepared to sacrifice herself to save Kakeru. By that point, Lysette had already beaten Avarisha. The Red Knight returns and Lysette now faces Kakeru. The duo have a little discussion about morals and Kakeru tries to get her to stop her plans before it's too late. Lysolette, however, refuses to listen to him. She raises her hands to attack Kakeru, but then Verard appears through the Eye of Aeon and asks his lover to stop trying to take over the world. He was wrong to write off humans in the first place. Lysolette refuses to listen to them. Instead, she tried one more time to steal the Eye of Aeon. However, this time, Misuzu and Superbia Akamisao are there to protect him. They manage to send her away from the eye. Kakeru appears near her and tries to use Momono's fragment to send her into limbo. Avarisha shows up shortly and holds Lysolette there, forcing her to get into limbo with him. With her lover gone, Misao is left with nothing. Yuka is freed from her crystal cave and rushes to hug her lover. At that time, the Red Knight alternate dimension begins to collapse. Misao quickly teleports them all to another world completely different from the initial one. In this world, Yuka and Kakeru have all their friends alive and well: Takahisa, Yukiko, Seiko, Tadashi, and Kaori. The two decide to live peacefully and completely forget about their former world or the Red Knight. Kakeru still has his Eye of Aeon, but this time, he covers it completely and hopes to never use it again.